Create this painting with me by applying the wash techniques we learned from last week.
You always dreamed of making it big in your town.
Hi everyone, welcome. If you're new, I'm Elisa, the artist behind Elisa Laporte Art. Today we are going to create a painting using the wash techniques we talked about in our last video. Wet on wet, wet on dry, and dry brush. However, we will not be tinting a background. I will show you how to use that technique in another video. If you would like to use this sketch, you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter and receive all my sketches for our paintings. If you're going to recreate this painting or one of your own using these techniques, use the hashtag #LookElisa so I can see your work and it can be featured in one of my videos. We're going to start by creating our sketch.
We'll teach you to blush and how to get your way. Useful tricks once you get the taste of it.
You want to spray your paints? Okay. We are going to start today's painting by taping our paper. I already measured it out to a 5x7. Again, we tape our paper down so we don't get any ripples and bumps while we're painting. That way it is flat. It makes it so much easier to paint and easier to control. So we taped our paper. Now today we are going to be painting a barn with a big sky. I want to show you how to use your wet on wet, dry brush, and wet on dry techniques.
They'll cherish you. It's when they do, they'll cherish you. When they do, they'll cherish you.
So we're gonna have our sun coming from there. Sometimes it makes it easy to remember where your sunlight is coming from if you make a little arrow in the top corner. So we'll do that. Our sun's coming this way. The first thing we're going to start off with is our sky. You do want to make sure you are careful of these three buildings here because we want them to stay white. We are doing a wet on wet first. I usually have 2 pails of water here, one for dirty and one for clean. You do not want to be putting dirty water where you want it white. So I'm going to wet my paper. I'm going to make sure it's nice and wet, nice and saturated. I'm going to carefully go around these buildings because if I don't get them wet, then they'll stay dry. Then the paint won't go into them. It'll be much easier to control that. That is one way of saving your whites if you are doing a sky and you don't want something to be painted. Just don't paint it and the paint won't go into it because it'll only go where we have our water. Make sure it's evenly wet. And then when it just starts to lose its shine, that means it's soaked in enough that we can start painting. I'm going to use my 3 primary colors here, my yellow ochre, my cad red light, and my cobalt blue. These are going to be great colors for a big sky. The important thing also when painting is drawing your eye to your focal point. So one way we've drawn our eye to our focal point here is with our road. And it's pretty much the only thing here. We'll have a little bit of background foliage. But another thing where our sky is so big, we want our sky, our clouds, to move so they actually direct us to our focal point, which is the barns here. The other thing that you can use to focus is putting your darkest dark next to your lightest light. These barns here will be white, and this one I actually want to have a dark gray, almost dark brown. First color I'm going to go into is my yellow. It is my lightest, so I'm just going to create a movement. It pulls you towards those barns. Just a very tiny bit of red. I want it very light. It does not take a lot to overpower things. Here this is coming down, so I'm gonna just hurry and get that. And see how it's avoiding my barn. It's exactly what I want. Now I'm gonna go in here and I'm going to place my blue kind of on top of that red and yellow in between them. It'll create kind of a purple, so it'll almost look almost like a storm cloud or like the underneath of a cloud, how it's more of a gray. Again, here it's kind of dripping. I don't want the red dripping. I wouldn't mind if it was blue, but so I will put some blue on top of that one. It's a very pale sky. Darken my red up a little bit here because it's still quite wet. So I think I want to darken my colors. Not the yellow so much, but that blue and red. I want to darken those up. It's beautiful. I like this. I need a little more sun over here since it is a light source. Use your dry paper towel if you need to clear up anything. Now before I move on to my barn, I need to let this dry. Otherwise it will start to bleed into it. What I can do in the meantime is prepare some of my washes. Also, I can start a little bit on this side of the paper, but it is still a little wet here. So depending on whether or not you want bleeding, you just want to be careful. And I do not want to go with my hair dryer. When you're doing a wet on wet, never use your blow dryer, because this is when you do want your paints to just mingle with each other and decide where they're going to be, and they won't do that if you use your hair dryer. So this one you do need to just maybe stop, take a break, let it be. It's not too big, so it won't take too much time to dry. I'm going to tilt it because see how I'm getting this little dip here and it's kind of settling. I do like the orange that was formed down here. After this is dry, if it's not dark enough or if there's parts of it you don't want, you can actually go back over it with another wash, but you do need to wait for it to dry so that you don't muddy your colors. Hey, we're back. Our sky is dry. So now we are going to start in on these barns here. Okay, the first thing I want to do is the shadows here. The sky may seem fairly dark because we have nothing else to compare it to. So I'm going to go into my raw umber, make sure it's pretty diluted because we're going to start with the roof of this building right here. I'm going to move to my rigger brush because it is smaller, and this is quite small. If you're not quite sure how dark it's going to be and you don't want to make it too dark, just test it on some paper. I might want mine just a tad darker. Right here, I'm going to go into this roof. Make sure you don't go to the very top. I want to leave that very top actually white. I'm just going to put in a tiny bit here. This is our wet on dry. There was enough that I just wiped off my brush, and now I am pulling the rest of that color down the side of that roof. Now, I want to continue my wash, but I want to darken it just a bit. I'm going to take my raw umber, add just a little bit of violet to darken that up just a little bit more for the side of this building. I'm just going to connect that and see how easy that was. Make sure that's straight. This is just really one wash, and we connected the whole thing. Go back into my paint, thicken it up a little bit, and I'm going to touch this roof with my brush. Make sure you don't have too much paint. Test out your line. Don't want a very thick line. I just want a thin line here with the top of that roof. There. And you can do the same thing here. Just very thin lines. For this barn, it's white, but it will have a slight color just because of the way we have our shadow. It's going to cast a little bit of a shadow, and the roof is kind of a green color, so I'm going to do actually a bluish green. Use cobalt blue, very pale, and I'm going to go into my Viridian or Hooker's green and mix a little to make a turquoise. Come back over here. I'm just barely going to touch this edge, rinse my brush, dry it a little bit, and then come back and kind of softly blend that out. I do not want to have too much, just a very pale, almost green blue there. We'll work on our silos, which are both a brown. For these ones, I'm going to use burnt umber, which is a little bit warmer than our raw umber. leaving the tops white. Just go in and paint. Very light wash over that one, and you can connect them, just making sure you leave the top of it white. And I'm just gonna leave a little tiny white between those two, as if the sun were hitting it. Straighten this line up a little bit. So we've got the color of our silo. Really like that, but I want it to be a little rusty, and it has a little bit of gold. So if you have a gold or like a quinacridone gold or an Indian yellow, I'm just gonna touch a tiny bit to the top here, some to the side here as like a little bit of rust color. Now it kind of looks blotchy, but that's okay because we're gonna go over and create shadows, so it won't be so noticeable. Next thing I want to do is create some foliage right here. So we're doing these in layers. This is how we build up wet on dry. We do a little layer by directly painting it on, wait for it to dry, and then go again. This foliage in the background is actually not going to be too green. It's going to be more of a blue green. I'm going to use ultramarine blue because of the haze. So the further back it is, the more of a haze it'll have. I'll have a mixture of green, the sap green, and a more blue green using the sap green and ultramarine. I want my brush to be fairly wet. Okay, go in and just touch. Be careful of the barns. Just kind of randomly place it in. And I'm gonna rinse my brush and go into the darker color and mingle it with my lighter green while it's still wet. And it'll blend together. Make a cohesive tree line here. You can even have little sky holes. I'm gonna do this tree here. I'm actually gonna take my sap green straight and add a little bit of that quinacridone yellow to it. Or you can add an Indian yellow or whatever yellow you might have. Because the sun's gonna be touching just the tips of this. So I'm gonna go through, I wanna paint it all kind of that yellow green first. And then as it dries, I will go back in and create the shadows on it. You can also touch some of that yellow green in here where the sun might be hitting some of those trees back there. The roof of this is going to be that dark raw umber. So you have a little roof here. We'll do a window, a door, and we have some windows up here, which this should be dry now, so it should be okay to go in. And then I'm going to create the underlying line here under the barn roof. I can darken that again, but for now I'm going to let it dry so it doesn't get too big. Go back in my blue turquoise mix and kind of go under this line here, under the barn. And then I'm going to create vertical little lines here, the slats of the barn. Going back to our silos, we're going to darken them up. I'm going to add raw umber to my burnt umber, and we're going to have some shadows here from our barn. You can touch them to that roof, that is just fine. They'll probably blend there, keeping a little gap right here next to those two silos. So the sun is probably just peeking over and touching that one. And then I'm gonna curve my lines so you can see the curve of my silo and blend that out over here. Kind of have that line where the sun would be hitting it and where the shadow. On this side it will be slightly lighter from reflective light. Go back in and I'm just gonna touch it and let it blend down into this silo. I'm gonna add that purple again to some of my burnt umber mix for the shadows that it's gonna create here on the ground. This shadow here for the barn doesn't need to look exactly like the barn, just kind of an indication that that's where it is. Now our tree is dry over here, so we will go back into our sap green and our ultramarine blue. Want it to be darker than this. If it's feeling a little too green to me. When it feels a little too green, you want to add just a tiny bit of cad red. Now make sure you don't add too much, just a very tiny bit, because red is very overpowering. And it'll kind of dull that green so it's not like bright Christmassy green. Get all that underside that's in the shadow here. Maybe touch in some more of that foliage background. I want to darken up a little bit of that right along this white house because I want that to pop, and along this part of the house. Just add some variety, depth, and you're allowing your tree over here to dry before you put another coat on it. Smooth some of that out, maybe. It feels a little harsh. Okay, now I'm gonna go into this darker green, blue green, and intensify some of those shadows. Not everywhere, just in a few spots. Now I want to add the trunk to my tree, so I can go into my burnt umber and just quick little line like we did with the piers. And you can go up maybe. And I'm going to come out here with our shadow mixture that we did for the barn. And I'm going to create our shadow for that tree. You're not going to see shadows for these bushes just because they are too far away. We're going to just do a little bit more here to our silo, and then we will start on our dry brush. So I'm just going to darken up a little bit more. It's all part of your wet on dry. Just creating a darker area in the center where we got our darkest, almost black shadow. And then this side of the top, because it's white, but on the shadow side. And then it has the grain shoot. I don't know if that's what it's actually called, but along the side here, and it kind of connects. I'm also going to add a little more detail into these silos. I'm going to darken just a little bit more under this barn and add some windows. The barn is starting to come along. Now we're going to dry brush kind of a grass or field in the front. Now I've been trying to decide whether I want more of a green or if I want to go more yellow. Again, if you're not really sure whether or not to do that, you can always take a piece of paper, color it, and then just put it over top. So that's what I might do, just to see what I like more. I'm gonna go with the yellow first. Or do I like the green with touches of yellow? I think I prefer the green. This is why sometimes it's good to do your color mock-ups and things like that early. So we're gonna use our sap green, go into it, practice our dry brush, make sure it's enough. Yeah. And then I'm just going to go across, kind of go around that road. Now don't go too much. You want to be careful that you're not overdoing it. So we have the touches of the sun hitting that, and I'm just gonna go into a little bit of that yellow for the highlights of where maybe the sun might be hitting our grass here. So just same technique, dry brushing that on. Go over that shadow with your green, and then I'm going to use my yellow ochre and a little bit of my burnt umber to create this dirt road here. Again, we're gonna be dry brushing. I'm gonna come around here, maybe in there. We'll let that dry. Sorry for it cutting out. I lost the last portion of this video. What I did finish was creating little blades of grass and then adding my signature. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Question of the day: what kind of painting would you create using these techniques? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell and share with your artist friends. For my latest video, you can check out a video up here, and for more watercolor tutorials, you can check out these right here. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep on painting!